During 2 weeks in February of 1994, Wini McQueen, a Macon, Georgia fabric artist, worked with museum staff and 7th grade students from Cincinnati area schools. During Miss McQueen's presentation, she introduced the students to her technique of transferring family snapshots to fabric and then incorporating them into a quilt or a clothing design.
Hello, students. My name is Wini McQueen, and I am a textile surface design artist. And what that means is that I dye and print fabric, but I also have a very special technique called photo transfer that will allow us to use actual photos and documents and put those images on fabric. And in fact, I use that process for making story quilts. But today you're going to create collages using my technique, and what we will do is do the transfer process, then we will do a slideshow, and then we'll finally finish that by creating a collage that will tell a story about your photo print that you've brought in for us to work with. All right, now this is called photo transfer printing. And I'm going to transfer a photo of an ordinary copy that was made on a copy machine. And this is what you'll receive because we have copied your photographs. And you see that I have taped my fabric down on 2 ends, but let me finish this up by taping all 4 sides of the fabric. I tape 4 sides of the fabric. And you all may want to use a buddy system. And what that means is you get one person to hold the fabric down flat while the other person does the taping, that you can see what happened, because if you have a buddy, you can pretty much lay it down just like that. And you can't it needs to be perfectly smooth and flat. Your fabric should be perfectly smooth and flat. Would you hand me that chemical? Thank you. I'm going to ask you to do double duty. I want you to do mine and yours. And what happens is, can I get a brush from you too? All right. Now, what I do is get some transfer fluid and use a minimum, meaning just 1 brush full, and try to keep it right on the print instead of on the tape border, because this chemical is very irritating to your skin, say nothing of your eyes. If you get it in your eyes, off your hands, we'll have to take you to the hospital. And you just begin burnishing. That's an art word for rubbing round and round. And I'm applying a lot of pressure. And I work here until my paper, my surface has completely dried out and it's turning white. And then I repeat this process. Can you repeat this process the way I did it? Okay, I'll help you. Okay, here's the transfer fluid and the spoon. Okay, that's good. Now you can begin the burnishing process. Let's see what his work has yielded. Okay, and that's called photo transfer. There, you've got it. It's your turn. fabrics that you have transferred, that you have your photos transferred on, and you're going to color them very lightly, tone them with the Prismacolor pencils. Then after you do the work with the Prismacolor pencils, then you will be allowed to mount them on mat board. This is mat board. You will glue them onto mat board and select fabrics from the end table there and actually tell a story with the photos. And you won't just be pasting borders on and decorating this or embellishing it. What you'll be doing is actually telling a story about yourself or something that happened to you. You may be creating a fantasy. You may be trying to feature something special or say something about the image that is on your fabric. And that's going to take a lot of creative thinking. And so while we're going through this slideshow, I hope you'll relax and enjoy and be ready to do something very creative once it's over. This slideshow is about my work and my art and how I discovered Robert Duncanson, who was a 19th century Afro-American painter. I begin by introducing you to the notion of textile design and my inspiration, and actually how fabrics are dyed and painted. And then I end it by showing you some of the slides that I have created, and most of these will be story quilts. What you're looking at here now are people who are sitting around sort of in a semicircle, and they're at a funeral, and they are in West Africa, and the dress is so different from what we normally think of funeral wear. And if you look closely at this clothing, you will see certain designs or patterns in the people's clothing. Now, these patterns are not just interesting things to look at. They aren't just repeats or stripes or little geometric shapes. They are actually, if you look very closely at them, these are photos. This is the written language of the people who live in that area. And this cloth is called a Dinkra cloth, and it's named for a king who was assassinated almost 100 years ago, but people still remember him, and they wear this cloth to funerals. And in wearing this cloth, they commemorate his life and his work, but they also are at the same time telling stories. And of course, they look very beautiful to us. Now, this was my version of a Dinkra cloth done photographically on fabric. And look up to the upper right corner. The upper right, and there is a stylized plant, the fern. You can even see the part that probably goes into the ground with the leaves. And when people look at that plant form, they can read it. And what it says is, I am not afraid. I am not afraid. I know so many of you may have been told that Africa is illiterate, but it's not true at all. Africa, in fact, has a written language that's very sophisticated, and sometimes it takes a lifetime to learn all of the nuances, all of the different meanings. And beneath the fern, there's a symbol or that we all can identify with all over the world. And they call it a coma, but what do we call it? What do we call it, everybody? The heart. Very good. I am what they call a professional textile surface design artist. And what that means is that I dye and paint and stamp and print fabric. And I make clothing from that fabric, very simple lines, rectangles. Almost everything is rectangular. I'm at work there at doing a quilt. I do sashes. I'm dyeing fabric here. And this is the beginning of a dyeing process that will yield what I call the money coat. Now, the money coat is called the money coat because there are symbols of money. The money coat is shown here from the front, and here is the back of the money coat. And if you look closely up at the top in the center, there are coins sewn in. If you look closely, you'll see various beads and strands of gold and cowrie shells. Raise your hands if you see a shell there. All right. That shell is called cowrie, and it was used years ago in Africa as a medium of exchange, as money. And people could actually buy, you know, their daily needs. They could purchase what they needed. And in the far, far, far background are stamped images of cattle. And you can see feet and heads and other parts of cattle. And what it represents is the way that money, or the way people exchange or traded in ancient times, before money was a part of the social thing that people did to get what they needed. They traded cattle like pigs and sheep and cows. And it really has not been that long. It's even happened in this country where a person may say provide a medical service to a family, deliver a baby, and would be willing, the doctor would be willing to accept a pig or a cow in exchange for that service. So that's what I mean by barter. This is the facing of the coat, and there I'm where I always wanted to be. I'm in the center of the $100 bill, and there are gold strands sort of sticking out of the coat, and all of that is to say why I call that the money coat. It's a story quilt in coat form. After working so many years with textiles, you have a lot of scraps, and so I had an exhibit once, and these were some of the scraps I found among my leftover textiles. Of course, at the very bottom, there are some tools that I work with, and there are a few strips of African kente cloth, this brilliant striped fabric on your left. That's a detail shot. This is a pieced fabric done with block prints and ribbons and natural rust-dyed fabric. The rust-dyed fabric runs horizontally, and I make that out of the same way that the rust is made, that or it comes out of the little specks of rust that you may see on your white sheets and your white clothing sometimes. And I'm telling you about this for a very special reason. When you begin looking at many of the 19th century paintings, when you begin looking at them, you will find very earthy colors, very different from what we have today. Today we have purples and shocking pinks and bright greens and yellows, but just 100 years ago or a little more, people had to resort to using barks and minerals and clays to create their paintings. And so the paintings don't have the bright colors that we're used to looking at today. And I hope that when you see some of the Duncanson paintings, you can appreciate why they're so green and yellow and brown and so earthy. And it's because he painted in an era before these bright colors that we know today existed. This quilt is a quilt that I made, and it's a quilt that can go on the bed, and this is a detail. I call it the turtle quilt, and I call it Urban Kenty for the experience that I have had in America creating fabrics with African symbols and repeats, as in the ribbons. This is called Home Alone. And this is a story about a little boy who begins his day at 7:19 a.m. and ends at 11:42. And what does he do during the day? Tell me, let me see some hands. What? He looks at TV. Does that look familiar to anybody? Has that ever happened to anybody who you know? Okay. And he has all of the various desirable foods, popcorn and soda and hot dogs, lots of comics and Arsenio Hall and wrestling, Barbie dolls. This is another story quilt that I made for a baby in my family for his first birthday. It's what we call a crib quilt. And there you can see his ancestors. You can see photo prints. You can see stamped prints. If you look very carefully here at a detail, you can see a contact page that's about the size of the prints that you've worked with, maybe an 8x10, showing the mother and baby together. And the baby was supposed to learn to count animals. It's actually a learning quilt. This is called Family Tree. And if you look closely here, you can see my great-grandmother, whose name was Lucindy. And she was born a slave, so I actually used two copies. A photo of Lucindy that was made in the 1930s, as well as a slave handbill that was typical of the 19th century. And I have combined two photographs into a copy, just as you have done with one. There's my husband to the right, and then there's my prize photo made with Adam Clayton Powell, who was a black congressman from New York when I was 13 years old, some years ago, and other members of my family. These are some scenes from my youth growing up in the segregated South, and some scenes from my neighborhood as well. Do you know why I call this family tree? Why?
Because you made it shaped like a family.
That's right, exactly, because it's shaped like a tree. And it's like a huge, huge quilt, about 100 by 100 inches. And at the very trunk of the tree are teeny little photos of all the children in the family. And can somebody tell me why you might see these leaves falling from the tree? What do they represent? Let me hear from you.
People who passed away.
That's right. They are family members who have died. And my grandfather and mother, and even my mother is shown there right in the center of the leaves. I like to use actual documents and photos in my work. And here in these slides you can see some of the documents that I used to create the Robert Duncanson quilts. The Taft Museum asked me about 2 years ago to make quilts about the life and work of Robert Duncanson, who was a 19th century landscape artist. And I'm showing you some details, and I'm going to move right through this. This is one of the quilts about his work. I do a lot of story quilts, and that's done, and it's called Ode to Edmund, and it's a story quilt about how Afro-American people were denied the right to learn to read and write when we were first brought to America. And so these are some of the stories that you can read if you actually had the quilt, and they are done with the photo transfer technique. This is a person who lived right here in this house. His name was Nicholas Longworth. And of course, this is a view of this particular museum. It was called Belmont when Nicholas Longworth lived there, and now it's called what? The Taft Museum. I'm sure that our time is running very short. This is another quilt that I did, and it's about this man's life and his times. And this is a very angry letter. And this is a detail from a letter that he wrote to a relative. And that is Robert Scott Duncanson. This is about Duncanson's life, and in the upper left is how he was photographed in 1867. Well, Duncanson had a sort of a nervous breakdown, I would say, and to your right you can see an image that's very blurred, and I made that by actually taking that photograph and laying it on top of the copy machine and moving it while the machine scanned, and that's why you have that blur. But for me, that distortion represents what I thought may have been the feelings that he may have had. In the bottom left is his obituary, and it is guarded by an ancient patron god of arts in Africa who was called Ta. And to your right is Robert Duncanson, forgotten by the world, his work scattered all over because his family moved, people bought his work, and that's how many artists' lives are, how it happens. That's their detail shots. This I thought was such a special story. I made a quilt about it, and it's about the Belmont murals. Longworth, who asked Robert Duncanson to paint those murals. It's said that Robert Duncanson lived right here in this home that was Belmont at the time while he painted the murals upstairs. And what happened is that the murals were covered over with wallpaper, and it was nearly 60 years after Robert Duncanson died before they were discovered. the Taft moved into this home, and they had this extensive art collection, and wallpaper was very fashionable. So they covered the walls with just layers and layers of wallpaper, and no one had really seen the murals in years. And so I have done this to show what it must have been like in 1930 when the paper was removed from the walls and people rediscovered the work of Robert Duncanson. Robert Duncanson's motto was, "Love is my principle, order is the basis, progress is the end." And I thought that it was significant to border one of the quilts with his sayings, and to let you know that we should appreciate a person who worked as a black man under so many tremendous difficulties and worked so hard to leave the legacy that he left for us in the form of letters and paintings. And when you go into your work today, I hope you will appreciate what you do so that you leave this, so that you take care of it, you take it home, you take care of it, you document it with your name, with the date, with even maybe an explanation. Some groups are taking their works home to, taking their works to school to write stories about their efforts. But I hope that you will appreciate the efforts that people make to document and record. And this is what you call making history. And so today, you will be making history. You'll be making your own history in the form of these photo transprinted fabrics and collages. Now we're going to get to work, and I know that you have given had time to give your project some consideration. And what we'll do is just give you like 1 or 2 minutes to gather your things, and you can talk, and we'll turn the sound off. And you all can kind of let loose, because I know this is a very long workshop for you. Okay, thank you for listening. Before I undertake any quilting project, I do lots of research and gather photos, and of course it can be very tedious sometimes to get permissions from various institutions, but that is what is involved in doing research and creating what I call archival quilts.